Thanks for joining me in this very important study. Once again, this subject continues to arise as I am confronted with questions from people who are either challenging God's grace, His character, His nature, or they're challenging His kingdom, or they're dealing with internal struggles. Okay? Now, when I teach these lessons, obviously, I want you to know that I've gone through all these things, so it's not that I'm judging these people. Not at all. Not by any stretch of the imagination. But some of the things that I hear remind me of what I used to believe. So many of us, we grew up as dispensationalists. We grew up with a human-centered view of salvation, a human-centered view of Jesus, really, rather than looking at what the Bible actually says. So the title of this particular message is called Living in Denial. Calvinist Catholics and their cognitive dissonance of believing progressive sanctification and practicing sin. Oh, and you so-called Preterists who believe the same, for example, Church of Christ and Sovereign Grace Preterists, this is for you too. That hurts people's feelings when I refer to them as Calvinist Catholics, because Calvinists hate Catholics and Catholics hate Calvinists. And Sovereign Grace Preterists hate Church of Christ, and Church of Christ hates Sovereign Grace Preterists. So anyway, all these terms, well, Catholicism is probably the most well-known, but Calvinism, sanctification, Church of Christ, Preterist, Sovereign Grace, these are all deep terms I recognize. Progressive sanctification. But I'm going to show, and I'm going to step on some toes, I'm going to show how utterly absurd, diabolical, and cognitively dissonant the idea of progressive sanctification is, or the idea of practicing sin as something that determines whether one is a Christian, a believer, a child of God. Here's the subtitle. Now, I know that was a very long title. It gets even longer. Come back to reality. Affirm the gospel, and you will be a happier, more relatable, and more truthful preterist. That is, find a body of authentic believers and confess your crap to them. All right? And I'm telling you the truth. It wasn't until I got to the place where I started telling people my crap, my struggles, that the burden was lifted. Now, I have been in the situation where I have confessed all of my stuff to people. And pardon me if you are offended by the word crap. Shall we call it dung, poop, menstrual rags, whatever it is. We need to be in the business of confessing, but I have confessed before where people took that to the rooftops and shouted it. And that's okay. Well, no, it's not okay. It's not cool to repeat a matter. The Bible says the one who repeats a matter separates chief friends or the best of friends. So we don't do that. We are there for God's people. We are there for them to give us their burdens. We fulfill the law of Christ by bearing one another's burdens. We fulfill it. You who are spiritual, Galatians 6, bear one another's burdens. Restore such a one. When someone is overtaken in a fault, which we're all overtaken in faults daily, we restore them. How do we restore them? Put them on probation. Excommunicate them. No, we restore them by reminding them of what Christ has done for them. Find a body of believers. Please don't come to me with all your struggles and your trials if you're not pursuing a body of believers. You might say, I've got to find the perfect church. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't have that mindset. You never will. And if the only place around you is a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses, go there. Yes, they're preaching a false gospel. I recognize that. Paul was going into the synagogues. They were preaching a false gospel. In fact, they were just like Jehovah's Witnesses. They denied that Jesus was Almighty God, and they believed in salvation by works. Jehovah's Witnesses believed that. The Jews believed that. Salvation by works, they denied the deity of Jesus Christ. Paul went into those synagogues because that's all that was there. But he was also preaching the gospel and setting up churches. But he was trying to find people, God's people. He said, I endure all things for the sake of the elect, that they may obtain salvation. All right? So you pursue fellowship with God's people. You pursue it. Don't be an island. 1 Corinthians, read it, chapters 12 through 14. You cannot be without the fellowship of God's people. Don't do it. I have a video that I've done called Why Preterists Have Despair. Oh, how I know. Believe me. Been there and done that. All right. One of the most frequent questions I get is not about the word generation, what generation means. It is, if I am a true believer in Jesus, why do I continue practicing sin? And what about the guy who goes to the strip club every Saturday? I get that question. Actually, that very question all the time. Okay? Well, maybe that's hyperbole. But that is a big question. And they always bring up the example of a strip club as if somehow the strip club is worse than gossiping, going to the strip club. Or if somehow the strip club is worse than porn or lusting after a woman or a man. Or it's worse than being drunk. Please. Why is it that everybody has to disparage the strip clubs? Listen, I sometimes throw in a little bit of humor. I am not encouraging anyone to go to a strip club. Been there, done that. It's not healthy. Doesn't help your marriage. Doesn't help your walk with Jesus. It really doesn't. Okay? And neither is porn. Don't do it. Been there, done that. Listen, these are things that are unhealthy, and I'm not trying to minimize the gravity. They destroy marriages. That's huge. Okay? They destroy marriages. Alcohol and immorality, things that I have struggled with in my life, they destroyed my marriages. I don't look at it lightly. Okay? So when I sort of infuse a little humor, it's not meant to diminish that. It's just that, look, don't look at the strip club as somehow worse than your gossip. Don't do it. Do not do it. What it should say is, if I am a true believer in Jesus, why do I continue gossiping? Really? Why do I continue having pride? Don't act as if the strip club is worse than your pride. Please, it's not. I know, I've been there. We make these things taboo because that's what the Roman Catholic Church did. They made sexual sin taboo. They created mortal sins versus venial sins. I get the question all the time. Who is counting sins and who decides which number or severity? Mortal determines the true believer. Who decides that? What does the Bible say? Psalm 130, verse 3, if you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? If God decided to just start writing down sins, who could stand? Gentile, professing Jew in the first century, Gentile or Jew. No one could stand. Why? Whether it's gossip, strip clubs, drunkenness, slander, pride, arrogance, a haughty look, no one could stand. There's no such thing as worse sins or sinning with greater frequency. There's no such thing as that in the eyes of God. God is holy. God doesn't look at the number of sins, whether it's 2, 20, or 2,000. God doesn't look at the extremity of sins. Jesus, again, I've said this time and time again, he did not have to die harder for murder than gossip. If anything, it's the other way around. But no, he did not have to die harder. Sin is sin is sin is sin. The wages of sin is death. Okay? Now, Matthew 5, I've quoted it many times, verses 27 and 28. is going to be a passage that we will refer to throughout this study. Matthew 5, verse 27 and 28. You've heard that it was said to the ancients, to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You are an adulterer. Your spouse is an adulterer. Your kids are adulterers. Your friends are adulterers. Your pastor, your minister, your elder, your deacon, you're all adulterers. We are all adulterers. That is proof. It's not about the action. The action brings linear, tangible consequences. But before God, it's about the heart. You have to get that. That is essential. If you don't get that, you don't know the grace of God. If you don't see that adultery is first committed in the heart and that it is the sin, the action, again, the action is a result of what was already in the heart. James 2, verse 9, but if you have respect of persons, partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. If you are looking to the Ten Commandments as your guidepost, as your rule of life, or the law of Moses, or whatever, his civil laws, his moral laws, his ceremonial laws, if you are looking to those in any way, shape, or form as the rule of life or a means of salvation, you are a transgressor. You are an adulterer. You are partial. Have you ever had partiality? You have violated the law. You are a transgressor. When was the last time you were partial? When was the last time you thought to yourself, oh, I'd rather go be with this person than that person because that's partiality, right? James speaks about those in those self-righteous people inviting special people to sit in the chief seats. James 2, whoever keeps the whole law and yet offend in one point, he's guilty of all of them. So if you've broken the law of adultery in your heart, even if not outwardly, if you've broken it in your heart, you've broken all the laws. Taken the name of the Lord your God in vain. Okay, that's not saying GD. That's saying, I worship God. I can save myself. I can live more righteously outwardly than my neighbor. That is taking the name of the Lord your God in vain. It is. Because it's dismissing the righteousness of Christ and comparing yourself with someone else. The Pharisees did that. They always esteemed themselves. They had contempt. They despised others. And they considered themselves as more righteous. That is an indicator of no fruit, no Christianity, no salvation, no Jesus. Christ profits you nothing. All right? So there they are. Matthew 5, 27 and 28, and down at the bottom, Romans 7. Those two verses, those two passages are going to be there throughout the entire study to penetrate your heart and to penetrate my heart. It's committed in the heart, and Paul says, Romans 7, verse 7, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? Let it not be said. But I did not know sin except through the law. You cannot know sin without the law. You can't. It's impossible. The law reveals the righteousness of God, his standard. You cannot know sin. I did not know sin except through the law. Romans 3 says, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. That's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the book of Genesis. Okay, the tree of life is Christ. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's the law. For I also did not know lust. There it is, lusting after a woman or a man or a dog or a cat or a goat or a cow. I had not known lust except the law had said, you shall not lust. One translation says, you shall not covet. In other words, coveting what? Someone else's moral behavior. I wish I was as righteous as they are. Now, this is the verse or the passage that gets brought up to me so frequently, and it is used and abused. And we will look at this passage in greater detail in part 2. The Lord bless you. If you were blessed by today's lesson, please consider supporting the proclamation of the fulfilled kingdom of of Jesus Christ. Using one of these 3 QR codes, Zelle, Venmo, and PayPal, you can donate straight through one of these apps, or you can mail a check to G. Ward Finley, P.O. Box 1017, Colfax, California, 95713. Thank you for watching.